Conversations with the Mind podcast, where we explore consciousness through conversations with interesting people. Our mission is to engage the collective mind piece by piece to bring greater clarity of mind to our listeners locally and across the planet, and to contribute to broaden the shared experiential knowledge and wisdom of existence. What's up, YouTube? Alright folks, welcome back to Conversations with the Mind. I'm your host as always, Shane LeMaster, and we're here for episode number 66 with a very special guest, Dr. Rob Colbert. How are you, sir?
Doing well, Shane. How are you?
I'm great. It's been a nice mellow day. And Rob has been on the show before, so this will be your second time back, and we're going to start repeating more guests because the conversation continues, I think, with everybody. So, that being said, when I ask you, the same question I ask everybody, what does Conversations with the Mind mean to you? And you've already answered this once, so maybe how has it changed, or maybe just express your thoughts on it, like in this present moment, and we can go back and compare the two or something. But yeah, what does that phrase mean to you now?
I think what's more alive for me now is conversations with the mind, thinking of mind as a collective, and that piece that, as you were saying, like, oh, you're back here again on the podcast. I was like, oh yeah, that's what makes it a dialogue. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's just kind of a one-time statement. But yeah, so holding this larger piece of how, humans. Language basically is us trying to F the ineffable, right? And so we're always trying to take the formless and turn it into form through language. And so I think that is interesting because that evolves as like what we express is only part of what that collective mind is. So what we can express in language. So then there's this unseen part too. And I think that right now in this time as humans, it's important for us to remember that piece of the unseen and the unseen parts of mind, and actually to really value them. I think that some of the conflict and things that are going on across the planet, we're diluting our true potential as humans because we're not honoring that unseen piece. And honoring doesn't mean we have to believe the same or go towards the same ideas, have the same values or any of that, but to just value the human lives behind making those values. Anyway.
So for maybe some of the listeners out there that, they hear what you just said and they're like, what does the unseen mind mean? Like, isn't all my mind seen? Like, can you give some specific examples for the audience of what, like, the unseen mind could manifest as?
Okay. For me, so I work... when I work with clients, I I start from a view of neuro-linguistic programming, basically kind of just boiling it down to learning styles, and that people filter information from the world certain ways, and so certain ways on the intake, and then certain ways that they deliver it. It's also filtered through, whether they're a visual, auditory person, kinetic, getting the body in there, somatic experiencing, stuff like that. So that's the unseen, right? Those are the unseen parts of the mind, and the translation is, what we attempt to deliver. Like for me, I'm a visual person, so when I'm taking in information or something, I build pictures of how it's, or stories, pictures of stories of what these things look like, and then in order to deliver them, I have to, then it's a translation, because if, someone's a visual person, it's really easy, and I say, oh, hey, I see this, and they're like, oh, I see that too. Otherwise, if I pay attention to it, if someone's more of an auditory learner, then it's like, oh, I have to deliver it in ways that are dialogue, or, more of a, linear expression through words or something like that. Is that making sense?
Yeah, totally. I saw recently, it was some YouTube video on consciousness, but pretty well produced. I don't know the name of it, but they interviewed this young woman who holds like 23 world records for the most sequential numbers memorized.
Ah.
And she was describing how she is able to do that, and it's some absurd number, like 700 digits or something like that. And she says she creates a visual story based on something that she's familiar with, so like her walk home from work. And then she'll take that story that's sort of ingrained in her mind, and then she'll imagine it on the way back, and she'll assign a number to different landmarks on the way to her house, and like come up with this story in her mind of like, you know, oh, I saw, you know, 2 light posts at this intersection, and that made me turn left, and that'll be like integrated into her story, so that when she's recalling the numbers, she's actually just recalling the visual story that she told herself. Yeah, I think that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that the body can, or that the, yeah.
Well, the story aspect. You know?
Yeah, no, I'm reminded of like synesthesia, or people that experience, you know, it's a cross of how we normally take in the world. So it's like a cross on the filters, but tasting numbers or having different things like that.
Seeing sounds. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, no, that's something that's been coming up recently. We were talking the other day too about bisociation. It's this idea of, it's like the intersection of 2 ideas that generates a new idea. As we were just talking through this, there's a piece of, you know, the unseen and the seen, and I'm relating it to the particle wave duality, right? And so maybe the unseen is the, you know, the pure potential wave existence, and the particle is the seen, or, you know, like so yeah, now I'm
well, the particle becomes seen by the observer too, you know.
right.
I think those split particle experiments showed that. Something else I've been interested in talking to you about is, and related to this bisociation intersection we were talking about earlier, but so conversations with the mind, like having conversations, my mind having a conversation with your mind, but the potential to have one mind under the influence of an altered state of some sort, having a conversation with another mind under the influence of an altered state, right? And then the unseen that is revealed, perhaps because of this, because of the change in frequency in brain waves and you know, thought generation and things like that. What do you think about?
Yeah, no, I dig it, and like I think that's one of the things that's been unique. Well, I can't say it's unique, but it's special about humans, that we gather around substances that change our, you know, and that's across the planet. There's evidence of that, right? So, from an anthropologist standpoint, it's kind of like could be considered closer to like a human nature than a lot of these other things that we put on. You know, Western culture likes to kind of package human nature as a certain set of, you know, values or these kind of things, but really it'd be hard to pin down a true human nature other than like, oh, we're social beings that like to alter our consciousness, and so we get together to do that. And that's just kind of in the solid that has kept humans going for a long time.
And you know, it's not only true, it's true for any kind of altered state. You know, you take people going to the bars and drinking, right? They're altering their mental state with a particular substance, and it's putting them both on the same wavelength so that they can still conduct what seems like meaningful conversation in those states, right? In that moment, if you can remember them. But for me, like, I haven't had a drink in over 10 years, so when I go to the bar, it's fine at the beginning of the night. I can converse on that same wavelength, but other people's states of consciousness change with alcohol, and all of a sudden they're able to communicate very clearly with each other, and I'm unable to connect in a way that's meaningful with someone else in an altered state, you know?
So there's a fun one. There's a, if you want an example of the seen versus the unseen parts of mind, I've been in experiences, typically like in the summer when the weather's really nice or something, and you're kind of like out, and maybe it's earlier in the day, like maybe even before noon, but it's an earlier part of the day. People are just kind of out and about doing their own thing, and then someone enters the restaurant who's like day drunk, like maybe they went and played a round of golf and started at 7 a.m. So they're just like, but it's wild how the atmosphere changes, right? So when that person or small group of people that come in with this very different wavelengths happening, right? Like alcohol being a depressant, like they just kind of come in, the way they converse, the way they, it's so disruptive at so many different levels, but it's real subtle, and you can watch the whole environment of places change, right? I've seen this happen more than once, and eventually people will end up clearing out, or like avoiding these kind of people, because it is so jarring. If everybody was there, if it was later in the evening, or people had been drinking, it's different. People kind of just tolerate that, but seeing it when there's such a juxtaposition, it really is striking. So.
Yeah, and I don't know, I find it hard to connect sometimes when those wavelengths don't match up, but then there's the other side of it where if two people are in altered states that are similar, and they're having a conversation with each other's mind verbally, like they're both vibrating at a different frequency than their every average day vibration, so what's the potential there for maybe generating ideas that probably couldn't have been generated at maybe a lower vibration or something like that, maybe if you're buzzing higher, like even like two meditators, right? They're meditating together, and then come out of it and have a very deep dialogue about the inner workings of our mind, I feel like they'd be able to connect on a level that can generate, get extra information that's maybe unseen in normal states of consciousness.
Right, and I think that's points towards some of the benefits of meditation and stuff is kind of a process of being able to retrieve information in more of a clear way, right? It's not necessarily about getting rid of the thinking or any of this. It's just about recognizing when it arrives.
Yeah, paying attention.
Yeah, when fear shows up, and instead of being like worked up about it, you invite that in as the old friend that fear. Well, here you are. It also, as you were talking about that, it reminds me too of meditation is a good example, but then, so indigenous traditions using medicines, specifically down in South America, some of the curanderos, they actually come from traditions where the person who came to be healed by these, plant medicines didn't actually take them, right? The healer was the one who ingested the substance and gathered information from the realm that was visited to that medicine.
Did some psychic surgery.
Yeah, to then deliver the information for this person. And, it's like, and, you got to stop fighting with your cousin, or you got to, this is causing trouble, that then you don't eat well, and then your diet's off, and, all the, the different things. But it really is wild to think about it that way. Or in the healing ceremonies where the healer also takes the medicine. So the person being healed and the healer, and just what that does for the availability. In Western medicine, we just wouldn't even think of that, right? Like you wouldn't go to your psychiatrist and be like, all right, doc, let's take that antidepressant together. See, it's absolutely ridiculous.
So I have an kind of an offbeat question, but related to healing practices, and you were mentioning some very beautiful healing practices, with the curanderos and things. But here's a curveball for you. So, what do you think about instances in human history where we have so-called healing practices, or practices that are meant to generate growth agriculturally or whatever, but have involved mass human sacrifice, right? Like down in the Aztecs, right? Sacrificed thousands of their own people on a regular regular basis to like bring forth, you know, fertility in their lands and things like that. And it was an honor to be like sort of selected to be that sacrifice, if you know, in that culture. I think that's an interesting one.
It is, and you know, as an anthropologist, it's always interesting to look back, and you know, with things like that, we're just making up the story about why that all took place and what context it exists in. And so with that, I just kind of wonder what our current state of affairs will look like from the future, right? Humans die daily. You know, we have mass genocides and stuff like that, and what we see it is like, oh, that was just like some people trying to make sacrifice so that they survived a war, or you know, like whatever crazy other bullshit story you could make about these things. Like I don't know, but it's if you come from a place that mind doesn't only exist in the body, that it also exists in this unseen realm. Belief systems that don't place that as like it's not on the moral compass for that not to exist in the body. It's like, well, no, that just goes somewhere else, or it exists in a different realm. So then, you know, the decisions you make on, you know, based in that context looks differently. You know, it's actually revered in some ways of like, oh, achieving things to a different realm or afterlife, or so.
Those are all perfect examples of the unseen, you know. And I think our listeners might be asking, well, how the hell do you see the unseen?
Yeah, drugs help. I don't know. Yeah,
sure.
I think that's probably why humans do, you know, alter their consciousness. Is, you know, it does lift a veil, and you know, I recently was seeing some of the videos back from the LSD trials in the 1950s, and just seeing the video footage. You know, they look like pretty typical white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, you know, people. I mean, they're really waspy, actually, kind of a feel to it. But then you see them in high doses too. These were not like typical recreational doses of like 100 to 150 mics of LSD. They were definitely taking 300-400. So that the altered state of consciousness happening, but then them realizing that it was an extension of reality, that it's not, that it's based in illusion, that it's not like a hallucination, but you're actually viewing the world as it is in a different way, right? Instead of viewing something that doesn't exist. Right?
You're tuning into, well, the different frequencies of the unseen, you know, like you know, the brain operates at all these different, I don't know if I have this thing shows the frequency list. Yeah, no, it doesn't. But as your level of consciousness changes, the frequency at which it operates changes, right? So higher frequency brain waves are thought to have, you know, more expansive thinking. You know, these are like meditative or like deep sleep. You know, REM sleep, it even has some of those brain waves. And, you know, being able to achieve some of those brainwave states any number of ways, you know, drugs to, you know, easily alter the consciousness if you know what you're doing, you know, meditation, martial arts, all sorts of things, you know, sometimes even getting into a really good book, you know, can really alter your consciousness such that you trick your brain into thinking that you're there, you know, alongside the main characters. So I think you said something, and I forgot what you said, but it's a perfect segue into another curveball question. Is any of this even real? What do you think?
Oh, yeah, I recently saw a meme that's Keanu Reeves saying like, yeah, let me think of it for a second. I forget how it starts out, but he goes, oh, and, you know, just so you know, The Matrix was a documentary. And, you know, in some ways, I do feel that it could be possible. Well, and you know, I think that that's a very cinematic Hollywood way of describing it. But if consciousness is not located necessarily within an individual, we talk about it as a collective consciousness, all these different things. So if it's not localized in the body, and then so when the body dies, it's, you know, it exists somewhere else. Well, then yeah, we kind of are just like this, unseen thing that taps into a physical reality, and that falls a lot in line with like Hindu cosmology, the in and out breath of Brahman, and so just this idea that the manifest is only manifest because it's manifest. If it wasn't manifest, it'd be unmanifest. And that's just like, okay, well, that's like thinking of it as this in and out breath. When it's an in breath, there's something there. When it's an out breath, nothing there. Full, empty. And that's just the divine interplay.
And even breaking it down even further, like into different actions with the breath. Like if you're breathing in, the act of breathing in is an action, right? So you're manifesting an action. And then the out breath is also a manifestation of an action, a deflation of what was once there, But in between the breaths, there's these really small gaps that I like to pay attention to in meditation where in those spaces between, either at the bottom or top, between the in breath and out breath, there is no active manifestation by my body, under my control anyway. Like my heart rate's still beating, my blood's still flowing, my cells are still moving in every moment, but I'm not creating any action. And I find a lot more clarity in there because it's almost like a really brief escape from the physical reality, that we experience. It's just like boom, and then in between each breath it's like a little burst of, just nothingness, which is, so full when you're actually there. It feels so loving and embracing and full. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting. So is this even real? Like, a lot of people put up really good arguments about if physical reality is real, but also, the simulation theory, like you were talking about, that this is all not real, or maybe physical reality is just one version of realness. I know that in my own experiences, I feel like I've been to places where, like you said, they're always present, but you finally get to see them. They're opened up to you, and it doesn't feel like a hallucination. Being defined as something that's not actually there. But it's like an overlay over the physical reality that I'm used to, over my conditioning. And then all of a sudden I see this whole other realm overlaid, and it feels more real than the physical reality sometimes, where you're just like, I have been here before. This is familiar, it's not scary. It's kind of a little overwhelming and surprising sometimes, some of the things that you experience, but it feels real. It feels just as real as the physical reality. Sometimes even more. What do you think?
Yeah, I think all sorts of things. It's interesting because it's like a generative reality that it's not real until we've arrived there, and then even when we've arrived there, it's still not even real. That's kind of where we exist in the past. Sorry, I'm thinking of it more of at a psychological level instead of a physical matter piece, but it's definitely interesting working with people, and that is basically the work that I helped do. If you boiled it down, was like people that lean too far into the future, I help them kind of relax and lean back into the present. People that lean too far into the past, I kind of pep them up and help them bring them into the present moment. But that's just being right here and right now is the best tool we got.
Right. It's the only one, and it's pretty damn awesome. Okay, so I think you spoke about this on the last show, and I wanted to get a little bit more into it because I've been more fascinated the more I hear you speak about it. And this is the Hearing Voices Network, right, that you mentioned on the last podcast, and sort of your experiences experiencing those those aspects of reality. Because I am in complete alignment that I believe that all these voices or apparitions that people see or hear are absolutely real. If they're real to you, then they're a real thing.
that's real enough.
Yeah, totally. So, but I don't necessarily experience voices. I do experience like the presence of my grandmother. This is her right here, in her judo gi back in the 50s, I think. She's pretty
Wonderful.
awesome.
Yeah.
So I experience her sort of as a guardian angel watching over me from time to time, and almost I feel like I've almost seen her as an apparition, you know, late at night, things like that. But I wanted to ask you about, so you talked last time about your experiences in this realm, but what I was wondering if you could unpack maybe some of the theories behind, like what people think is going on as far as brain stuff, neural connectivity, maybe frequency modulation, in order to, like, what's going on between your mind and whatever is around us that
well, yeah,
you can tune into that.
I wish that I had answers to that. What I can say is that science doesn't have answers to that, and I think that that's sometimes what frustrates. You know, I know a lot of people in the medical field, MDs and you know, the like, that are skeptics of some of these things, and you know, the ones that I really appreciate having conversations with are the ones that are skeptics, but just admit that it's just because we haven't been able to observe, right? We haven't observed why, you know, and that's, you know, I really take a critical perspective of like brain scan images and stuff like that. Like they're really simplistic ways of describing very complex exchanges that really we have only begun to be able to even observe, and we don't know if what we're observing is it or not, right? There's so many different layers to this, you know, like so whether you're watching like brain waves or brain frequencies, or even going down to like neurotransmitters, we're still discovering new neurotransmitters. We're still just discovering new ways that they interact and change in the body, and you know, to boil any of this down to like, oh, it's just as simple as like, oh, somebody's got this going on in their, you know, dopamine receptors, and so that's what's doing all this, or you know, oh, it's this person has access to alpha waves and then can switch to theta waves, so they have this advantage. Like, it's just so overly simplified right now that there is no telling if we're even looking at what is right to be looking at for these kind of things or not, right? Like, that's yet to be seen. And so I just don't think it's a simple answer at those levels. With what is, you know, I would also put it at an individual level too, that like not all of these things are the same. Not the way that people receive these or that I experience them is definitely not always the same. And so within that, who's to say that it's not any combination or even, you know, a lack of something being there that's kind of generating some of this stuff, so we don't know. But I think that from, you know, from the social aspect of it, I think normalizing it and actually just bringing it into our dialogue, because, you know, a lot of these things are packaged around the negative consequences, and like, so there's these negative symptoms of mental health, right? And so it's like, oh, these voices told you to do something bad, or that, you know, you had visions of terrible things or whatever. That's only one way that this exists, right? Like, they're, you know, hearing voices is as common as being left-handed, right? So it's really common, right? So if we talked about it more that way and actually just said, oh, well, it actually, so it's not being left-handed that, you know, makes you wrong, you know, which actually was, you know, part of my grandfather's generation. But instead of seeing it that way and seeing it as like, oh, well, how is this just a part of who you are? So if it's like, yeah, you hear voices, okay, well, when does that cause you distress? When does that cause you joy? When do you appreciate it? When do you not? You know, like, that being a part of the conversation, instead of like, oh, we could probably locate why this is, you know, taking place and annihilate it in the brain.
Yeah, so more of a focus on the relationship that you have with the voice, rather than like what's actually generating it in the brain, or how it's, you know, if the brain is just like a filter, like how it's filtering through the complex organism.
Because I guarantee you, like, if science actually had figured any of that out, they really probably would have honed in and, you know, helped people out from under this distress, because sometimes this really is distressing in people's lives. And so if it was a simple answer, we would absolutely take that.
And this is, you know, this is something that the West has tried to put its finger on, but obviously science has not caught up to, you know, the level of measurement that would need to be, you know, maybe with quantum computing, you're going to be able to reach something like that. But the mystic traditions and spiritual traditions have lots of theories about altered states and hearing voices and seeing ghosts and things like that that happen in our Western society to a lot of us, right? Like you said, it's as common as being left-handed. But there's, yeah, I mean, is there literature? Is there a big body of literature on these things in our culture? And maybe, I mean, studying anthropology, I'm sure you've come across many theories of hearing voices, and I'd be curious to hear about, like, you know, how that's treated in like the Amazon and how it's seen in, you know, Asian countries and things like that.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot written about this, and yeah, it's definitely interesting how you know, the Western view values certain things over others. So there's a movie, Crazy Wise, that's out. We've done some viewings with the NOWAK Society a couple of times and some other places, but that's a good one if people wanted to check something out about that. It's kind of rooted in more of a modern documentary on some of this, but yeah, lots written on that.
But we conceptualize it differently here in the West than, say, other countries, other cultures.
Well, yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, and you know, we take some from that too. I mean, that's a really big question.
Okay, so maybe I'll switch gears a little bit, and still kind of related, but it's something that I think you and I have been talking about, you know, not on the podcast, but outside the podcast, and I would like to get some opinions on the record around the idea of creating or identifying a Western culture around psychedelics, right? Okay. So because we adopt up to this point so many cultural aspects, you know, almost in an appropriation way from, you know, South America and from you know, other traditions in Africa and things like that. So we appropriate them into our culture and try and, you know, being the, you know, the mixed bag that we are here in the U.S., it's it hasn't really found its own voice, you know, and I feel like that's holding us back, you know, as a culture and how we view drugs and how drugs are in legal policy and, you know, our relationship to them. And I feel like it's a vital step for us to identify, like, what is our Western culture around psychedelics.
Yeah. Well, so what's interesting, you know, as you say this, it's first important to recognize the consequence of prohibition. So, you know, I've kind of grappled with this like piece of like, oh, why are we seeing more like peyote ceremonies and ayahuasca ceremonies? You know, like any given weekend, you could probably go down to Boulder and find 4 or 5 ayahuasca ceremonies going on, and that probably spans a spectrum of people who are offering it, people who are involved in taking it. You know, all of those things. You know, you probably see some closer to indigenous traditions. You see some from the Santo Daime Church, which is more like a Catholic bent on it. But like, yeah, you'd probably even find some people that were just like experimenting it together with their partner in their home alone, right?
Native American church too. I want to.
Right, but so recognizing that yes, some of that we can talk about as appropriation or like people, you know, trying to explore these things in ill-informed ways or, you know, whatever. But that's also all direct result of prohibition, right? Because those substances have found you know, an avenue in to be a little less illegal, right? Like if you can justify it as being a part of the Native American church to go do this ceremony, to take a drug that alters your consciousness in these ways, then you feel a little bit safer about it. But the reason you have to go down that whole line is because all of these other substances that we have readily available are denied to you, right? Even the safety, the relative safety compared to a lot of other things that we just take for granted have been shown, you know, it's still denied adults. healthy adults to make this decision for themselves, right? So it's just really interesting. Like, why hasn't the culture arrived? Well, because we've been prohibiting that culture from even participating, right? Or even granting that culture the respect of knowing what's best for itself, right? Like, Reefer Madness was all about demonizing cannabis and all of the different pieces around the cultures of use,
And
jazz musicians.
When did that one come out?
Reefer Madness, I think, was first in 52, 53, maybe.
So right alongside like those old LSD videos that you saw, right? Like, those were used for propaganda too, like crazy. You know, I've seen the old army videos, you know, that they show like about LSD with like this news reporter guy. He's like, we definitely know that this damages the brain, and you should definitely not take this. And then it shows, you know, clips of those 50s LSD trips. Yeah, but it's interesting because prohibition's only relatively new, you know, in the entirety of human culture. Restriction on altering your consciousness, which this is really what it comes down to, you know. A drug is a drug, you know. People are just looking to find these different states of consciousness, and that's what's being restricted. But prohibition has only been around relatively new, you know, but it came on really strong, and it had a really deep and dark impact on our society and societies all over the world.
Yeah, well, so, you know, we need to just be very clear about Nixon and his, you know, the premise was definitely based around oppressing races and classes of people, right? And so, just one of the ways we can be real about that, bringing about the psychedelic culture, is rectifying some of that too, and recognizing that, you know, a unification of people across demographics, and so, you know, minorities, people of color, people of lower socioeconomic status and stuff like that, the more they come together, the better they are. The more separated they are, and the more they, you know, fight against each other, the better the system is, right? So that definitely was the riff that was being put in there. Like, you know, no drug is inherently good or bad. So to just begin to package them as like, oh no, this set of drugs is public enemy number one, was really wild, right?
With almost no evidence,
right,
to support that.
And at the same time, you know, promoting benzos on the other side.
Oh yeah,
you know, these things that definitely had more severe consequences. And so, yeah, just I think coming out from under some of that and recognizing that as like, oh, that was what they were attempting to be squashed in prohibition, was some of those aspects, right? And so also that piece of, you know, I love that I've seen some articles coming out that are talking about how the use of psychedelics of all different sorts as well. It's not like just, oh, the people who take mushrooms or, oh, the people who take LSD have more of a connection to nature afterwards. So like after having these experiences, having more of a connection to nature, and that just being super important, right? And so that was big coming out of the 60s. And it was important. That was when people were first talking about peak oil, or like this, like, hey, we have this reliance on this substance that we don't really need, right? Like that, at that generation, they knew that Henry Ford had designed the Ford automobile on hemp composite plastics, and you know, the diesel engine was first made to be a biodiesel engine, right? You know, so it's like these things, they knew that, and then they're like, oh, well, why don't we just go back to this? And so then, you know, the petrochemical lobby, and then until the entire industrial military complex definitely were like, no, that's not the direction we're going, kiddos. So we're gonna, you know, squash all this free thinking drug use that you got, and, you know, don't use those. Use these ones that get you back to work, and
the status quo, maintain the
status
status quo.
Yeah, go back to school.
And I think, you know, capitalism had a huge influence on that, right? An entire focus on, you know, what can we produce and make money from, and it still, you know, bleeds into every part of our society today, which sucks. But I want to bring up real quick, because you were talking about the new studies coming out showing that or I don't even know if they're new or they've just been showing up on my feed about the connection to nature, right, after these altered states. And it reminded me of something that Dr. McKenna said when I talked to him, and he said, I think he's been saying this for a long time. I've seen him say it on speeches, but the plants rule humans, that it's these stupid monkeys that think that they're in charge, and the idea that you can enhance your connection to the rulers of the planet, which are, nature and the plants and things like that, seems like it would be a no-brainer, right? Like, we should probably start trying to connect in a different way to nature than we have been, because certainly it's a consumerist type of connection to nature that we have now. Let's strip as many resources as we can and try and, make an effort to mitigate things. But, we certainly don't have a good relationship there. And it would make sense that, part of this global consciousness shift should involve, looking at that relationship again, and maybe assessing, that was a relationship from the past, and that's not serving us. How can we move forward in a new way, sort of with like we were working on earlier this week, like with a vision, for the planet collectively, and reach this new higher state of like collective consciousness around eco issues.
I've been toying with some ideas around this, and so, part of the dialogue that's shown up here, especially, we're on the Front Range of Colorado. NOWAK Society's been holding psychedelic professionals meetups, Boulder, Denver, Fort Collins now, and, one of the things that's easily identified is that it's a lot of white people showing up. A lot of white people in the Denver decrim movement, and not that it's a bad thing, but a lot of people are saying like, oh, well, we need to be make sure that we're including diversity, recognizing that minority groups are underrepresented, and that there's reasons for that, and so also determining like our work in this as the white folks who are showing up. And it's like, well, yeah, and we're not supposed to just wait for other folks to come to have this dialogue. We need to be discussing this too. And so what's interesting is I also have this idea that, if we talk about bullying, right, like bully cultures, bullies are not born, bullies are made, right? Like a bully typically would come from a family system or a home where that type of treatment was kind of passed on to them from caregivers or whatever, and so that bullying piece was then, taken to school and delivered to other kiddos or whatever, right? Well, expanding that out of like the elementary school and expanding it into humans, right? Like white culture, imperialism, colonialism are the roots of the bullyishness that exists now, right? Like those things have been directly impacting what we experience now. And white culture, not that all white people have been, responsible for all of the terrible things that are going on in the world. Like that's clearly not true. But within the United States, the white culture has definitely helped perpetuate some of this. And I believe that the way it's been perpetuated is within our white culture. We first, within our family systems and with our communities, have had to learn how to bully ourselves first, and then we've spread that out to other communities. And so that's why it's hard to pinpoint down. Some of it turns into racism, and so yeah, we definitely see it related to people who have different color skin. As that excuse kind of runs out, you see it then blamed on other things like socioeconomic place. And so either it's like the rich you hate or the poor you hate, but you're definitely going to hate somebody that has different amounts of cash than you do.
Yeah, and you're never asked to question your own.
Right. Yeah. And so it's that bullying piece of like, oh well, we're being treated poorly to whatever extent, so then we are going to pass that on. Yeah. And so I think that some of these roots really need to be like rooted out. Like we need to get these root balls and like pull out, and that in real ways that could possibly be why psychedelics are so important to our communities right now. That actually confronting this piece of like, oh, and we've passively participated in these systems that have been racially charged and racially oppressive, right? Or have been, oppressive to women, and like all of these things, and we've passively participated in that. So psychedelics being able to bring us closer not only to each other but the planet. I mean, maybe that's why we see more white folks showing up in the scene. Is it like, well, yeah, no, we need heavy doses of this because we're as well as
we're a messed
you know,
up
other
bunch.
communities. Yeah. You know, it's like, do you know African American communities like need a striking experience of altered consciousness to understand the oppression that they're under? No.
Mm-hmm.
It's daily they're
pretty
reminded
apparent.
that shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like thinking of it that way, you're like, oh well, okay, you know, psychedelics also will mean different things in those communities, right? Like they are awakening to different stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and so I also think that that's important to remember as we're bringing in this dialogue. Is like, oh, and you know, of course these things are not being used in the same ways, not even the same drugs either. So we need to like, you know, recognize, you know. It's funny in some of my circles, you know, when we're joking about drugs, we'll joke about PCP, right?
Mm.
It's an easy target just because it gets a lot of bad press.
Mm-hmm.
But we also need to recognize that there are communities that really like that drug.
And a lot of
value
other
it.
good drugs came from PCP.
Yeah, ketamine is
Yep.
an example of that. But like, so you know, I actually caught myself making fun of it, and that's when it dawned on me. I was like, oh, and that definitely objectifies anybody who would be in this crowd that either, you know, did it and liked it, or you know, was a part of whatever. Yeah, how welcome do they feel in the dialogue now? So we kind of got to pay attention to things like that, and yeah, really be ready to expand that idea of what it is to use substances, and you know, what is it? If we're talking about psychedelic meaning mind manifesting, what does that look like from different points of view, right? Like if your worldview is different, all right, well, something different manifests from that mind.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
And, well, I want to ask you this then, because, and this idea about, you know, white power, white oppression, my wife and I are reading White Fragility right now together.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's like blowing my mind how blind I've been to my own like issues around this, you
Mhm.
know, and how I manifest it unknowingly, and how I've been conditioned to do certain things that you know, that I don't even know are oppressing people. So it's like helping me change, and it's been really helpful. And the next semester, I'm taking a class where we're reading, I think it's called Deconstructing White Power, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
And it's waiting for me at the CSU bookstore. And so I look forward to reading that too, and further, excuse me, further expanding like my understanding and my awareness around this issue. But race is just one of many dividing issues, right? If it's not race that you see that's causing division in the country one week, like the next week it's about something else, like, you know, equal pay and things like that, and or something else. It could be any number of things that are used to distract us. One of my past guests, he was questioning whether we can even have the capacity right now to unify around one, maybe panacea, right? Something that we can all connect to, beyond race, beyond sex, beyond, you know, gender, beyond sexual preference, beyond country and national borders, beyond any of this. He was unsure whether we even have the capacity with our current mind state to even find something to unify under. I have a tough time finding something as well beyond the idea that consciousness or the exploration of consciousness could be this panacea, because it is something that we all experience across all, you know, variables. I mean, our consciousness is different too. That is also, you know, the same across all variables. So maybe this could be a panacea, or psychedelics as sort of a tool to help people expand their understanding of consciousness. Maybe that is like the physical tool that we're being given in this physical reality to find that panacea that's going to unify everything, you know, because we've certainly tried to unify over other things, and we're still a divided world.
Yeah. So it's interesting, you know, as you first started to talk about that, my first inclination is to like affirm feminism,
Mm-hmm.
and just to kind of come about and say, well, uh, maybe it's not about unifying. Like maybe there's not one answer. Maybe it's being inclusive of many answers is actually what we're headed towards, you know, and that being a unifying force. That, you know, again, from this affirming feminism is like, giving people agency over their body, right? Like maybe that's the unifying piece, and we can't determine what that looks like for everybody. You know, there's people of all different abilities and, you know, shapes, sizes, colors, creeds, whatever. And so just recognizing that, like, oh, we can't say, oh, this is the one way that's going to get them all. You know, like the charismatic Christians just being like, yeah, no, you got to have, you know, the room and space for you to do that. And, you know, I think that recognizing that a lot of what we're talking about too does boil down to First Amendment arguments, right?
Mm-hmm.
The right to free speech and the right to peaceably assemble.
I think the freedom and freedom over consciousness should be amended into that. The First Amendment.
You know, if without having the specific language,
Mm-hmm.
it already kind of provides for some of that. But really, that's what we need to really be talking about. It's like, why would we, you know, try and hold these as like, you know, this really important thing within our Constitution, the amendments to it, the Bill of Rights, saying like, okay, so first off, we just want to give people the right to say and do what they want, and to go ahead and hang out with people that want to say and do what they want too, right?
Mm-hmm.
As long as they're not harming other people. Exactly. And so it's like, okay, well, most all of the psychedelic drugs that I've seen, people pretty peaceful with,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But it's also, just normalizing that part of the conversation, I guess. But really, I don't know that it's not one way. Like, what I actually appreciate about the psychedelic movement is that it increases choice,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, one of the other things that Prohibition has done is, you know, every time a chemical comes out that is exciting and, you know, people are going to, you know, want to explore, they start putting it into the scheduling process and then try and schedule all of the analogs to it, right? But just generates people creating different ways to get high, right? And has not actually solved the problem of people getting high at all. It's generated more diversity in the different chemicals, right? And so recently discussing with some colleagues, you know, like MDMA has, you know, been heralded as this breakthrough status. It's helping people, you know, with PTSD and these different things, and it's, you know, I believe it's safe enough. Adults should just be able to go get this. But then to find out that, oh, well, yeah, then there's other chemical mixes, and I don't actually know when this one was made, but 3-MMC being preferred in some circles, and they're saying like, oh, actually, if you're working with, you know, trauma, this is actually the one you want to go to because it's got less of the euphoria and more of the like right-on dialogue, or I forget how it was described, but
You're way more up to date on like the research chemicals. Like even like 2CB, you know, I hear that one being thrown around probably most out of some of the newer research chemicals, but I still, you know, I don't know very much about it. Like what can you tell me about maybe some of the up and coming research chemicals that are being experimented with?
Well, a lot of them aren't new. Anne and Alexander Shulgin.
Mm-hmm.
Alexander was the, you know
Pickle
Shulgin.
and Tickle. His books.
Yeah. 2CB was, I think that's the one that he reported was his fave.
Mm-hmm.
Shorter acting, more tuned into the effects that he wanted to get from altered consciousness. But yeah, no, it.
Like what were some of those things that he was going after as far as getting from 2CB?
It's actually been quite a while since I've visited
Okay.
that book, so I don't want to do it any injustice.
What do you know about the effects of?
I
from what
believe
you read?
that the duration's 2 to 4 hours. I believe it's similar psychosocial effects like increased empathy, connection with others, and closeness. From what I also remember is a lot of people experience slight visual alterations and stuff like that. But it's not as I don't believe it's as speedy or as like the methamphetamine piece from MDMA.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think is there. So I think that it's a little bit shorter acting. It doesn't leave you feeling like wore out and exhausted. And this is just what I remember from like trip reports and stuff. Of course, bluelight.org, you could find out about people shooting it up in their eyeballs, probably.
I wonder if removing that methamphetamine component from the molecule made the safety profile of the drug better than MDMA in some ways, and if Shulgin reported that in his books.
Oh, that wasn't a direct chemical thing that I was saying.
Okay.
No, that wasn't. They are actually totally different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's a good place for us to take a quick commercial break, but stick around for segment number 2 with Rob. We're going to get into some materials that he brought into the podcast. I'm eager to see what he's brought us, and we'll be right back. Stick around. All right, folks, we're back for segment number 2 with Dr. Rob Colbert. I just like calling you doctor. I don't know.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Anyway.
Worked really hard for those letters.
Oh, I know. I'm learning that.
Yeah.
But enjoying it. So right away, I want to get into some of the materials you brought, because I know that, one of the most important aspects of this podcast is that it's bringing together consciousness in different people, and myself included, at like a snapshot in their life, right? So then I have like this archive that I can always go back to, and you can go back to and listen to your own mind state, like at certain points in your life. And so I love it when guests bring things in to talk about, because then I get like a really clear snapshot of like what's going on in your mind currently, and what you're kind of pondering, and what's like on the cutting edge of Rob's consciousness. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind like just sharing some of this cool stuff you brought.
Yeah. A book that I'm actually just getting into, maybe a quarter of the way through, but it's called Emergent Strategy, Shaping Change, Changing Worlds, Adrienne Marie Brown. Really have been getting into, back into like, social change. That's actually what my PhD's in, is social change, and looking at this piece of organizing within the community. And so, this book kind of just came to me online, and I decided to pick it up, and it's good because, we really need people to be organizing in ways, right? And so I just want to really encourage people that starting businesses, starting nonprofits, starting groups, starting research. These things are really within grasp. We need to go towards them if we feel inspired, right? We need to stop waiting for the right degree or the right leader or the right whatever, and to recognize, no, we need to do these things for ourselves, and we have the tools that we need within our communities, and just reaching out and starting the dialogue usually brings about people who are absolutely necessary for the conversation that you're wanting to have in your community, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's been wild, talking about organizing. I've been reflecting on organizing the NOWAK Society, mm-hmm. right? Actually, just the process that we went through of wanting it to be, something that allowed kind of an umbrella mission statement and values that then would allow us to do lots of different work. It wasn't like honed in on like, oh, this is the specific problem. We kind of recognized that, with drugs and medicines, there's lots of different problems, and we may not be able to identify all of those to even begin. So instead of going about it that direction of trying to figure out like, oh, how are we going to like transform drug use in our community.
Yeah, and those issues change over time too, so you're leaving yourself the flexibility to like adapt as the cultural story changes too.
Right, and so just kind of being flexible with that too, and saying like, oh, well, what do we, what does the community, first, what do they want to learn about, what is available, and with NOWAK, it actually was interesting, getting out and doing community speaker series, and we Dr. Shannon Hughes and I were putting together a Right to Try talk, and this was informed by some dialogues that we had had. Joanne Janal, I don't believe she was a senator at that time, but she's a senator now, representative here in Colorado. But we were just talking about the Right to Try law that had passed in 2014, kind of discussing what she had wanted from that, and some of the story about behind that and why it had been brought about, and realizing like, oh, this is important. People don't know that this law exists. Colorado was one of the first states to put it out there, and it was increasing access for people with life-threatening or terminal illness to have access to treatments, right? Mm-hmm. And so a lot of this had been used for advanced chemotherapies and things like that, but it was also very open that this could be used on any treatment that had passed phase 1 safety trials for FDA approval. And so drugs like MDMA, psilocybin, even LSD had all passed these phases, and so they were also acceptable as treatments. And so we just decided like, oh, well, people need to be informed about this. Our community, like, this exists in law in Colorado. And actually, while we started preparing some of this, I think we'd given a talk or two. It was passed at the federal level. It was signed into law in May of 2017, I think it was. So it actually became a federal law. And so we were like, oh, awesome. Now we really need to get this out there. And so it was just noticing that one little piece of like, oh, we should just let people know that the Right to Try law exists, and that there might be ways that we could incorporate the use of treatments like psychedelics that have been proven for things like end-of-life anxiety, like psilocybin studies specifically. Mm-hmm. And so we're just kind of putting it out there, and the serendipitous alignments of just going out and sharing that education with the community sparked a lot of ideas. And so, Kevin Matthews and several of the people from the Denver Decrim movement actually met at some of those meetings, and there were some talks of putting some things on ballot initiatives, but nobody was really kind of going towards it, and that just allowed the connections to start to happen. And so in a very mycelial way, mm-hmm. those roots is that, oh, okay, well, now we've found some a source of nutrient that made those people thrive or feel vibrance for mm-hmm. life. And so they said, okay, let's go towards it. And so they did. And not that it was an easy thing. There was a lot of tough work in it, but they made something really wonderful grow, right?
They had a connection on a cause.
Yeah, and it came from that mm-hmm. connection on a cause, right? And so the grassroots organizing around that took place and brought this thing about. And what's fun about it is, also in a mycelial way, SPORE was born after that, the Society for Psychedelic Outreach, Reform, and Education. Nailed it.
That was awesome.
But like that was basically the fruiting body off of this mycelia, right? It was like, oh, okay, so we did this thing, and oh wow, it passed. Now it's going to be part of Denver law. Mm-hmm. that this has become a low priority, and all of these other things that were in the legislation, the ballot initiative that they put forward, then they were accountable to do. So then it was like, oh, now we got to, the fruits that are being bore of this, and it's all happened really quickly, and it's been interesting just to watch kind of the natural progression of this, and to understand the different relationships that shift and change based on needs and wants, and the community, if they are, as they are able to hold a lot of these things, transforms in ways that sometimes is not comfortable, but usually is pretty necessary. Mm-hmm. And then to continue to see the new fruits that come out of these networks, right? And
that'd be an amazing experiment. I just want to name mm-hmm. this and get this out there. But what about like a neighborhood healing experience where an entire neighborhood gets together, where maybe there's been a lot of gang violence, things like that happening, okay. and then they all communally take a psychedelic, and have this mass healing experience together, facilitated by, I don't know. I know that would cost so much money to do and be insane to get past, IRBs, but just theoretically, like doing healing on communal scales like that, I think that could be really powerful.
Yeah, no, we'll head towards some of those research projects, but I think we'll start on smaller scales, yeah. of just like I think that groups of veterans, and so
Mhm.
veterans as a community is, of course, bringing more choice and treatments to that community is important.
I think the
I hold a
VA
lot of
just
value for that.
totally like didn't they just accept ketamine treatment? They're like paying for it more now often or more often.
I know that would be encouraging.
Yeah.
I would hope to see that. But
think I saw
you know,
that.
so seeing, yeah, I'm getting a thumbs up. So yes, they are accepting coverage of that. But what I was going towards is like, you know, having group work with veterans is an interesting angle. But I'm actually interested about having groups of veterans who were like in squads together, or you know, that were actually in battle together, whether they're in the same branch of military or not. You know, some of these events were you know, crossed branches, and so having, you know, the Marines and, you know, the people from the Army who were at some of these things, experiencing these crazy traumas where lots of people died, or whatever trauma was coming out, it would be interesting to have groups like that do these healing experiences, because it would be based around the same events. Whereas if you have mixed groups, it's everybody dealing with different levels of things, and so it would just be interesting to see if there was anything that was, you know, if you could be of more benefit honing in, and, you know, if we did have a tragedy like this, like let's say it's a school shooting, and just being like, oh, okay, no, this was terrible. This person came in and terrorized the school, shot it all up, and so, okay, we're going to have the school come together, and we're going to hold, you know, have to look different, and, you know, but it would essentially be a ceremony to hold with an altered state of consciousness. Actually, when you first asked the question, I was like, oh, well, why don't you have people spin? They just go out there like, oh, sorry.
Everybody at
spinning
4
today,
o'clock,
yeah.
go get dizzy together, and then talk it out.
But that medicine is you know, definitely an altered state, but it's more about the giggles, I've always found.
Yeah. This idea of like that. I mean, those are great examples of experiments for like to hone in on collective consciousness, right? Because if you can collectively, I mean, because when I don't know about you, but when I've gotten in rooms with like old high school buddies, right? Like we're all back in the same space, you know, we're sharing a collective consciousness in that moment, right? Same with like getting veterans together who have been, you know, in the same battle. You get them together, they're sharing a state of consciousness in those moments, and using, you know, the collective, doing a collective healing of that body of consciousness that's sort of like I'm a visual person too, so I'm imagining like this group of people enter this ballroom where there's going to be this ceremony, and there's just this metaphysical cloud hanging over the group, but it's all the same cloud. It's like all these pieces of this collective experience that shattered apart when they went their own ways are now coming together, and it's sort of manifesting over them or around them or something, and then the healing begins with the ceremony, and they're all like in this massive collective consciousness space container that's created just naturally by bringing these groups together. You know, I think that could be.
It's interesting as you describe that, though, because that's already what exists, right? Like hanging out with you know, veteran friends or something like that. This experience, one of my friends is an Army vet, got a chance to go and hang out with a couple of guys that he went to Army Ranger School with and then was deployed with, right? I think they actually, I think they probably ended up doing cocaine and booze was probably the drugs they were doing. I don't think, and I'm not judging that, I'm just being real about what they probably decided to do, because it was, you know, a fun time to get together, and they, you know, had that. But what was interesting is just being with people that had experienced the same things was healing. They described that as like, oh, I needed that. Oh, that, you know, I feel so much better now that I got to just hang with them or see them and know that they're doing all right. But like, yeah, that sense of camaraderie that was naturally built through their experiences, returning to that same, you know, like you're saying, this metaphysical cloud that was over it, it also brought a sense of healing to that, right? Like they were better off. And even, you know, if it was like, you know, I know one of the guys was definitely dealing with a lot of depression, yeah, just having it severe. But in the days following, just being around some good buddies wasn't the same, right? You know, it took a couple of days for the depression to come back on, you know. But it is interesting, cause, you know, like just to talk about it like at that level, and then saying like, oh, well, so what if they invited in, you know, other drugs instead of
Mm-hmm.
instead of cocaine and booze?
Mm-hmm.
What would it have looked like? And you know, there's definitely documentaries out there. What's the I forget the one I watched recently. I believe Matthew Call from Veterans for Natural Rights is in it, and I forget his wife. Is it his wife or the other person? Yeah, it's his wife as well. But yeah, these veterans sharing their stories of going down and doing these ceremonies, and it just being such an amazing transformation for their lives, right? And so, if anything, if you're going away from like any message, we need to increase choice for people. And if someone says that, you know, taking a handful of mushrooms and hanging out with their buddies is healing, we need
Who are
just,
you to say it's
we
not?
Need, yeah, we need to believe them and
Yeah.
say, oh, okay, cool, that's the way you experience mushrooms.
Mhm.
I don't.
Mhm.
They're more of a panicky, anxiety-provoking
Mm.
experience to me, and that has its own medicinal values as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, to just recognize that and increase the choice that people have, because you know, it doesn't look like war's going anywhere.
You're
We're
right.
definitely going to have people coming back that have been impacted by those experiences, and I want the best for them. I want them to be able to return to any sense of normalcy that we can help.
Yeah.
You know, and so seeing that as, you know, that's our gift back to them. Like, you know, thank you for keeping us safe here in this country, so that we can, you know, keep going to campus and getting your PhD, or I can keep going to my office and seeing clients. That's all thank you to these service members that are putting themselves out there, and whether that's here in the States or abroad. That if these treatments are beneficial for military and even police, you know, recognizing that police officers, firefighters, these people see very traumatic events and see very traumatic things. Paramedics, EMTs, they're on the scene of violent crashes. And if some ketamine-assisted psychotherapy and dosing them up with a lozenge and then letting them talk through the week's events helps them, you know, not just drink their way through the weekend, I think we should make that available, right?
Yeah,
we
I
need to
agree.
increase that option and choice.
Yeah, I totally agree. Sorry, I had something that was there and then it was gone. Yep, the state of the mind. Okay, so I want to just switch gears into what you brought today. Is this related to what we've been talking about too?
Yeah, no, I talked a little bit about emergent
Okay,
strategy.
okay.
That one, the other one that I really thought you would dig, a moral defense of recreational drug use.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, have you seen that one?
No, I haven't. That
You'll
looks
dig it.
nice. Okay.
It does a wonderful job of actually, you know, first off breaking down how we've even decided that society can make moral judgments for others.
Yeah.
Deciding on, you know, what's prudent, what's
Right.
not. And so, yeah, really coming down to this piece of like, and drugs probably are not the worst thing that people could be
Right.
doing, so why
Right.
do we prohibit them from doing so?
Yeah, I do remember what I was going to say though,
Okay.
about bringing veterans together and how just bringing people together has a collective healing. I was once contracted for this organization that's no more. It was called Walton's Warriors, and it was a peer support group. So we recruited from the larger organization that is still around called Project Sanctuary, so people can go out there and check that out. But this group, Walton's Warriors, was focused on taking graduates from the Project Sanctuary curriculum, bringing them into a new space. So they were seasoned vets of the program, and they had me develop a curriculum for these vets around providing peer support to their fellow veterans who are suicidal, right? So our mission was to start reducing the 22 deaths per day that happen with veterans. It's probably even higher now. But it was so good to go on retreats with these guys and teach them these skills and practice with them, and then they'd come away from the training, week-long training, never met each other before, but went through this training together, and then all of a sudden they were like a band of brothers. I'm still friends with them on social media. They have their own support groups that have gone beyond the program in and of itself, and I don't even know what the count is now, but they continue to do that work with their fellow vets just on their own, and we continue to save lives like through this ripple effect, even though we couldn't get any more funding for continuance of the program, right? But just bringing these guys together in the same space and allowing them to connect on that level provided so much healing for them too, because they came from spots of suicidality, and then now they wanted to give back and help others using this peer support model that seems pretty effective at spreading these little tentacles through society to provide support that's there but is maybe not organized yet. And so I want to get back to NOWAK Society, right? So thank you for sharing about the right to try. I think that's super important. I still don't know about the history of NOWAK. So like, was that the first major issue that NOWAK kind of jumped on, or what are the origins of the NOWAK Society? How did it come to be?
Well, so in some strange way, I had talked about wanting to start a nonprofit from the time I was like a teenager all the way through. So
really?
there's some root that probably goes back that far. I volunteered with Dance Safe in like 2000 to 2002. That was my first experience with like nonprofits and harm reduction, and Dance Safe is still doing wonderful work. They're also doing donations for a big campaign to get some big scientific equipment, so a little plug for that if you want to donate. But yeah, so with the NOWAK Society, got caught up with a strange crew of people in Boulder, Colorado doing pirate radio in the late 2000s, it was 2008 or so. There was a gentleman went by the name of Knox Harrington. I believe that's actually a Big Lebowski character, I think, but that was his pirate name. He used to come in, he'd play a lot of Fish, Grateful Dead, even different things, like lots of jam band kind of stuff, but was into obscure stuff as well, like you get into metal or hip-hop. He was really eclectic. It was kind of fun. Did a radio show for a couple of years. His name actually is Daryl Nowak, and he passed away in 2015. So Nowak is an honorarium to him. It's an honorarium to his name. He was very oriented towards the community, like I said, very eclectic music interest, but also interest in the community. So he, was active with his kids at school and their different groups. So he was Boy Scout leader. He was also, he did so many different things. But he really, in the pirate radio days, one thing that came across was he was very libertarian when it came to drug use and stuff. It was just like, it's ridiculous that we don't allow people just to alter their consciousness. If people, people want to, go tour with Fish and be doing whippets all the time, getting high on mushrooms and Molly or whatever, like, so what? So just kind of coming from that point of view of just like, this libertarian idea of it. So anyway, kind of a nod to Daryl Nowak, but yeah, that's the namesake. As far as the folks and organizing it, we started out, we were organizing down in Boulder doing festival harm reduction. We had volunteered alongside Groove Medical, and so we were kind of providing support, like mental health support to people who are in crisis, and so we did a lot of work down at some of the festivals, Arise, Sonic Bloom, but just kind of being there as an adjunct to what the paramedics were offering. And so a lot of it was just sitting and doing harm reduction stuff with people. I actually dealt with a lot of drunk people. There were people that were just too drunk and dehydrated, and then you would also see people who had taken either a wild combination of drugs or too much of one drug or this or that. And so it was coming from the harm reduction, but really in that work too, we were seeing things like, I know at Sonic Bloom, we saw a woman who, she had left her house without her medication, and I forget what medication it was. It was a psych med, and knew that there were severe consequences of just stopping taking it, right? And so instead of, leaving the festival, Sonic Bloom was also held like 4 hours south of Denver or something like that. It's really far south. And so this woman had traveled all this way to come to this festival, didn't have her meds, knew that she was going to start experiencing these withdrawal effects, and so then decided the best idea for her was to pursue other drugs for the weekend, right?
Mm.
And so she had gone and sought out. I think at one point I had seen her on a cross of ketamine with, I forget what else. She got into all sorts of stuff that weekend. So we saw she was
That's my co-host.
quite. She was frequenting the med tent, as we would say. But then it was all of her responding to this like detoxing from her psych meds that were prescribed, and so that really entered into our awareness as we were organizing. We were like, well, we really need to level the playing field, and so what would it look like to make an organization that's wanted to help communities build right relationship with drugs and medicines, right, and that it's not just the substances that we're worried about. We also need to worry about our relationships with each other, right, and so. We kind of went from doing festival work into exploring different ways that we could help inform and educate the community about different things, and so doing community speaker series, really getting that out there, and that's evolved into our Psychedelic Professionals meetup.
Mm-hmm.
And so that piece is kind of saying we recognize that the student groups at universities around psychedelics, we're kind of holding a certain piece of the dialogue, and that's been great. That's been the grassroots organizing on university campuses. Awesome. They need to keep doing that. MAPS, Arrowwood, these big organizations have been around for a long time. They need to keep doing what they were doing. And NOWAK was kind of a response to saying, like, and we need something more local that really is addressing the needs of us here in the community, right? And so, that's been one of the great things, the right to try talk. And then, like I said, these meetups where we're having different speakers come out and just talk about the way these things are being used today. Mm-hmm. And so whether it's the research aspect with some of them that are only allowed in research practices, or, the ketamine-assisted psychotherapist coming out. And, so got a couple of those events actually coming out. Said I'd mention those.
Yeah, by all means. And for the listeners, those professional meetups are freaking awesome. I try and go to as many as I can, at least here locally, here in Fort Collins. But they're in Denver and Boulder, and any other locations right now?
Denver, Boulder, and Fort Collins.
Yeah. Okay, so I named them all. But they're fantastic. If you guys have questions about any of these substances, and you don't want to take my word for it, because God forbid, but go to these meetings, and there's a wide range of people, both professional and non-professional, with a wide range of experience that are more than happy to answer whatever questions you may have based on their own experience, because we're all non-experts, but we're also experts in our own consciousness. So definitely go to some of these. And you got some dates up?
Yeah, I do. And so to hopefully increase the longevity of how long it's usable as well, the Mercury Cafe in Denver, we've been hosting our Psychedelic Professionals meetups on the second Thursday of the month. Yeah, is typically how it's shown up. So January 9th, we're having one, Max Montrose, come out talking about cacti, and he's a wonderful human being. If you haven't met Max, you got to come out and see what he's got going. At the Wolverine Farm and Letterpress here in Fort Collins, we are doing the second Tuesday of the month, and so January 14th and then February 11th, those are coming up.
And the times for these events too?
Oh, sorry, yeah. The Mercury Cafe, we start those around 7 p.m. So about 6:45 we kind of start filtering in, and 7 p.m. we start for those. Here in Fort Collins, we start around 6:30. And so, let's see, the January 14th talk, I don't actually have the information on that one. So.
Well, if people want to find the NOWAK Society, go ahead and put the web address.
So the NOWAKsociety.org. You can also find us on Facebook at the NOWAK Society. And then the Boulder meetup, we have that at the Upslope Brewing Company out in East Boulder, and that one's on Sundays, and that one starts at 5 p.m.
Nice. So if anybody's interested, definitely check those out. Again, if you have more questions too, that's also a good place to get answers from a very friendly community. Okay, last question I have for you. And this one is another just out of the park question that I have particular interest in asking you because I only have my own experience, and In my observation and in my opinion, I think you have a wide range of experience with consciousness in all sorts of states. And so I want to ask you, how far have you pushed your mind? Like, how far have you taken it? And you don't have to get into specifics if you don't want to, but it's just an interesting question to me because I'm always wondering, I always feel like there's more to potentiate from my own mind, like even when I was going through my bouts with alcoholism, like the purpose of my drinking was to push it as far as I possibly could, and that was not a good one to go with. But and I've reformed my relationship with that. But for you, how far have you pushed your mind? Like, is there a formative experience or something that stands out? Like, wow, that was really far. Like, anything like that?
Yeah, I'm going to take the time to slaughter a Hunter S. Thompson quote and say those who know there's a line have crossed it. And the first time a friend showed me how to hyperventilate and then cut off circulation to my head and make me pass out, I think was probably one of the more formative moments. Those are the first times I experienced what is described in the research as I believe it's the emergent experience. This sense of realizing I am here right now, this is actually happening, but it's like that sense of everything emerging right now, and that emerging in a, not just like I'm here right now in this chair, in a way more
visceral way,
existential, oh shit kind of way. And so that was my first experience that I remember purposely inducing it, was probably those. And we were reckless kids. I think I was probably 7 or 8 actually when I learned that. I can't recommend that people do it, and I know that people are doing it. That's just something that kids show each other. It's the same as like rolling down hills. I used to love doing that.
Spinning actually, in circles. Yeah.
I've recently seen the hill that I used to roll down. I wouldn't walk down the thing nowadays. So it's just funny to think that I would roll from top to bottom over and over and over again.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, keep exploring and keep pushing it. And for the listeners out there too, for now anyway, parts of exploring your consciousness are still legal. So I always encourage all of you guys to go out there and explore your own consciousness. It's only going to do you good. But if you have any struggles along the way, there are professionals out there as well as social groups that can help you guys get through some of those blockages in your own struggles. So we all have them. It's time to dismantle the stigma around mental issues. So we all have them. It's time that we start feeling better about seeking treatment. So check out the YouTube webpage as well as the comments below the podcast. I'm going to list all the websites that Rob gave me today. Any parting thoughts? I want to thank you again for coming on the show. It's been amazing. I feel like we've been riffing back and forth pretty effortlessly, and that's always a pleasure for me because I get super nervous still doing these things.
Yeah, no, I guess I really do believe in this sense of we are the ones we've been waiting for. If you have an idea, or if you have the spark of curiosity about how you could, benefit the community, do it. Really, to incorporate the NOWAK Society, it was $50 to the state. We paid that in 2017. I wouldn't have guessed all of the things that we've done since then and the way that we have generated community, and it's all just come from a passion of us just saying oh hey, we want to do something fun. And we've learned a lot in that. A lot of relationships have changed and transformed, and we're going to keep going and keep doing it. But if it hadn't started with that piece of just we want to do something let's not wait for anybody else to tell us we can. We just said, okay.
Ask for forgiveness,
Yeah.
not permission.
And luckily we haven't had to do any of that.
Yeah.
But yeah. You just got, you got to go out and do it. Whether it's starting a small business and making something, or being of the public benefit and being a nonprofit, just go do it.
And I think those are the two secrets of manifestation: is visualizing the objective, right? Having a vision for it, and then do something about it.
Action.
Yeah, you can't just sit on your couch. So, more words of wisdom for all you listeners out there. Until next time, this is Shane signing off. Thanks again, Rob, for being here.
Yeah, sure.
Appreciate
Thank you.
And now we're gonna go eat some dinner that my wife cooked.
Happy
Peace.
Sunday.
Conversations with the Mind podcast is sponsored by mindops.com. You can find us at www.mind-ops.com. We're an eclectic counseling company providing mental health and mental performance services to individuals, small and large groups, teams, businesses, military, through face-to-face sessions or at a distance using phone or confidential video chat apps. We bring a unique Buddhist Western lens and specialize in general psychotherapy for all mental difficulties, sport and performance psychology for performance enhancement, addiction counseling for any maladaptive or destructive habits, and psychedelic integration therapy to make the most from your visionary medicine work. We are available as well for corporate workshops to address the needs of your employees' wellness.